He was just a mechanic who drew during his lunch break, while the command laughed at his drawings. But when the tanks with his useless angle went into battle, the generals stopped smiling. You ever draw something on the back of a greasy lunch receipt and get chewed out like you'd threatened national security? Yeah, that was me. I was just a mechanic, not a captain, not a planner. Not one of those white-gloved engineering boys with degrees and soft hands. Just a guy with busted knuckles, a cigarette stuck to his lip, and a head full of worry. And worry, my friend, is what kept me alive. We were somewhere near Southampton, January of '44. Rain had turned the motor pool into a swamp. Mud sucked the soles off your boots, and the stink of diesel clung to your skin like regret. The boys were tired. Everyone was tired. But Shermans kept coming in wrecked, and I kept patching them like I was dressing corpses for open casket. I wasn't trying to be clever. I was trying to stop pulling bones out of burned-out turrets. One morning I saw her again. A Sherman blown halfway to hell. Hull bent like a beer can, crew gone. 3 kids barely shaving turned to soot inside, and the hit. Right to the front plate. Dead center. I stood there, hands in my pockets, heart in my throat, thinking the same damn thing I'd been thinking for months. This armor's too flat. This at angle's a death sentence. So I did what any man does when he's too small to shout and too angry to stay quiet. I drew. Back of a ration form, pen borrowed from the medic tent. I sketched a redesign. Nothing fancy, just a revised angle, a different slope to the front plate. Change the geometry, deflect the shot. Less death, maybe. I wasn't dreaming of medals. I just didn't want to clean what was left of my buddies out of a scorched engine block anymore. Later that week, while changing out a suspension arm on a tank that looked like it had fought a freight train and lost, I showed the sketch to my sergeant, old Hank Rollins. Guy had a voice like gravel and a permanent dent in his helmet from Tunisia. He took one look and chuckled. "Harry, you trying to play God with a wrench?" "No, sir," I said, "just trying not to bury more kids." He didn't laugh that time. The next morning, Major Creighton showed up, clipboard in hand. Stiff like a broomstick, the kind of man who shaved twice a day just so nobody could accuse him of being human. Rollins had passed the sketch up the chain, figured it was worth a glance. Turns out, that glance got me a seat in front of Creighton's folding desk and a lecture that could have peeled paint off a hull. "This isn't your lane, Private Ellis," he said, not looking at me, just staring at my sketch like it was a bad joke in poor taste. "We have engineers for this sort of thing. Your job is to keep the machines running, not redesign them." I wanted to say something big, something about all the boys I'd watched burn because some office in D.C. thought war was a blueprint, but all I said was, "Understood, sir." He handed the sketch back, didn't even fold it, just let it flutter to the floor like trash. You'd think that'd be the end of it, right? I thought so too, but word got around, not in a good way. First came the jokes. "Hey, Einstein, fixed gravity yet?" "Hey, Harry, draw me a submarine while you're at it." Then came the jobs. Worse tanks, less help, midnight assignments that reeked of punishment more than necessity. And you know what hit hardest? It wasn't the work. It was the silence. Not one man in that damn yard asked if what I drew might have worked. They just laughed and turned wrenches and kept losing sleep when the names came in. A week later, they reassigned me to Depot C, the junkyard for half-dead Shermans, a place they sent parts to rot and men to disappear. No hot meals, no proper lighting, and the only heat came from your own bad attitude. I took the sketch with me, pinned it to a wall made of stacked tires, and kept working, day in, day out, cursing the mud, tightening bolts, remembering faces that didn't get a second chance. One night, a young corporal showed up. Wallace, kid from Philly. Talked fast, worked faster, smart but green. He looked at the sketch. "You make this?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, not looking up. He stared for a while. Then he said the only thing that made sense to me in weeks. "I think you're right." I didn't sleep that night. Not out of excitement, out of fear, because I knew, deep down, that agreeing with me was a dangerous thing to do. The next morning I was pulled in by the depot chief. He slammed a toolbox shut and barked, "Stop spreading ideas." Didn't say hello, didn't ask, just laid it out flat. "You're not an engineer. You're a monkey with a wrench. You want to survive this war? Keep your mouth shut and your pen capped." I nodded. I left. But the sketch stayed. What happened next changed everything. You don't want to miss how this unfolded. You ever see a man punished for being right? Not for breaking a rule, not for stepping out of line, just for knowing a little too much, and not knowing when to shut up about it. That's what Depot C was for. They didn't call it a punishment, of course. Officially, I got relocated to a low-priority maintenance unit due to specialized skill set. But let me tell you what it really was. A rust graveyard for machines nobody cared to fix, and men the army didn't know where else to put. The place smelled like cold grease, wet canvas, and cigarettes smoked all the way down to the filter. No brass came around here unless something caught fire. And even then, they sent a corporal to ask what color the flames were. My bunk was wedged between a busted half-track and a leaking oil drum. That first night I laid awake listening to the wind whistle through holes in the roof, wondering how the hell I ended up here. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of being treated like thinking was a crime. They didn't take the sketch from me, but they took my tools. Literally. First morning I walked into the pit, and my kit was gone. "Borrowed," they said. "Didn't know it was yours." Right. From then on, I had to beg for every socket, every rag, every busted torque wrench. They gave me the worst jobs. Stripped bolts, sheared threads, tanks so rotted the paint flaked off if you stared too long. I kept my mouth shut. Mostly. Wallace didn't. That Philly kid, the one who saw the sketch and said I might be right. He started asking questions. The kind of questions that made people nervous. Why are we still patching these hulls the same way if we know the armor's failing? Why aren't we even trying new slopes? Why did Ellis get reassigned right after showing that diagram? He didn't say it loud, he just said it. And that was enough. Next thing I knew, Wallace was reassigned too. Different depot, somewhere out in Norfolk. Just disappeared one night, like a part that didn't fit. That's when I cracked. Not loud, not public, just quietly. I sat down in the back of the bay, pulled out the sketch, now yellowed and stained with grease, and I started rewriting it. Not because I thought someone would listen, but because I had to. I couldn't stop seeing that same damn impact mark on every Sherman that rolled in dead. Same spot. Same story. And I kept hearing the same thing from the boys dragging them in. She took a round to the nose and didn't make it 5 feet. One afternoon I was elbow-deep in a busted suspension when I heard it. "Hey, Ellis," came a voice I didn't recognize. "You, the guy with the drawing." I wiped my hands, looked up and saw him. Lieutenant Malcolm Hayward. Tall, clean boots, no grease under the nails. But the kind of eyes that told me he'd been out there, not just behind a desk. "Depends who's asking," I said. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. "I saw your sketch. From back in Southampton. I need you to walk me through it." Now, you'd think I'd be relieved, right? Finally, someone higher up paying attention. I wasn't. I felt trapped, because I knew how this game worked. The moment Yuko showed you still cared, they could take something from you. Again. But I nodded, and I showed him. We spent 2 hours talking slope angles, weight distribution, engine strain, and turret clearance. I wasn't an engineer, but I'd rebuilt enough tanks to know where the lines bent and where they broke. Hayward took notes, asked sharp questions. He didn't talk down to me, didn't try to flex rank. When we finished, he folded the sketch neatly and said, "You'll hear from me." I didn't. Instead, I heard from Major Creighton. Again. He came in with 2 MPs. Didn't greet me. Didn't explain, just pointed. "Pack your gear. You're being transferred." "To where?" I asked. His mouth twitched. That same twitch from before. "Where you can be less of a distraction." They shipped me to a motor pool in the middle of nowhere. Welsh countryside, mud up to your knees, parts missing, no chain of command in sight. They called it a technical redirection unit. Whatever that meant. There were 5 of us. No orders, no clear supervisor. Just a list of machines too broken to fight and too valuable to scrap. That's when it hit me. They weren't punishing me anymore. They were isolating me, locking me up with the junk, hoping I'd break, hoping I'd give up and stop drawing. But here's the thing. When you've been dragged through enough oil and fire, you stop waiting for someone to save you. You start building your own damn ladder. That's when I made a choice. I took my last clean sheet of paper, laid it on a steel crate, and drew everything again. This time with measurements, angles, weight shifts, stress points, weld recommendations. Not because I thought it would change the war, but because I couldn't walk away knowing I hadn't tried. I called it Revision M47, M for mechanic, 4 for Sherman, 7 for the number of caskets I'd seen come back that month. This is the moment everything breaks open. The next chapter is the one they didn't want written, and it's where the real fight begins. Stay with it. If you also believe that sometimes a single idea can change the course of history, don't forget to subscribe. And in the comments write, who do you think most often ignores people like Harry, the system, or specific individuals? There's a look certain men give you right before they file your name into a drawer marked forget. It's not cruel, not loud. It's paper-thin and polite, the way someone smiles at you while locking the door from the inside. That's the look Lieutenant Hayward gave me when I never heard from him again. Back in that god-forsaken motor graveyard, I worked in silence. No orders, no updates. Just broken steel and quiet men who were sent out there for the same reason I was, to be forgotten without ceremony. We didn't talk much, not because we didn't want to, because it hurt too much to know how many of us had almost mattered. They gave us just enough fuel to keep the lights on, but not enough to test-run engines. We had crates of parts, but missing all the critical ones. It was like being handed a puzzle with all the corners cut off and told to make it work. But I still had Revision M47, tucked in a canvas binder, wrapped in oilcloth, hidden beneath a busted carburetor nobody would ever bother to touch. And every night, after bolting down the last plate or welding a fractured frame, I'd unroll that paper, check my measurements again, and trace the lines with my finger like it was a prayer. Not to be dramatic, I wasn't hoping for miracles. I was making peace. If no one ever saw it, fine. But if they did, I wanted to be sure I left no doubt. Then, on the 7th of March, something shifted. A jeep rolled in. Clean, fast government tags, no mud, no grit. That alone was enough to make heads turn. Out stepped a man in a wool trench and polished boots. Civilian, tall, thin, smelled like cologne, not diesel. "Ellis," he said, not asked. Said. Yeah, I wiped my hands, keeping my stance casual. I'd learned by then that showing interest was like bleeding into the ocean. He handed me a folder. Brown, heavy. "No name," he said, "but someone asked me to find you. Said you had something worth looking at." I didn't open it right away. You get a feel after enough disappointments for when something's real and when it's just another reroute on the way to nowhere. This felt different. Inside the folder, my sketch, redrawn, traced, numbered, stamped with a seal I hadn't seen before. Ordnance Review Board. There was a memo, too, dry as chalk. Said they were interested in exploring alternate hull angle configurations based on field mechanics reports. Field mechanics reports. That's what they called my life now. I should have felt proud. I didn't, because nowhere on that memo, not a line, not a note, not a whisper, was my name. The man waited, quiet, watching me read. Then he said it. "You'll be receiving a formal request to travel to Aldershot for a demonstration. Don't expect credit. But someone up top thinks what you drew might actually work." Now, that should have been good news, but let me tell you what that meant in plain English. We're going to test your idea, but we won't tell anyone it was yours. And if it fails, we'll say it came from you. If it works, we'll pretend it came from us. That's war politics, son. That's how things get done in rooms you're not allowed to walk into. Still, I went. Not because I trusted them. Because if they were really going to test it, I needed to be there to make sure they didn't twist it into something worse. Aldershot was colder than I remembered. Wind cut through your uniform like it had questions. I was assigned to an observation crew. What that meant was, stand in the back, keep your hands in your pockets, and don't say a word unless asked. Meanwhile, men in long coats walked around the Sherman like it was a racehorse they didn't know how to ride. They called the modified one Spec A. Had my angle, had my weld placement. They even followed the redesign down to the reinforced corner mounts I'd drawn by flashlight 2 months earlier. They never looked at me once. Then came the test. They rolled it out into a firing range, German anti-tank gun positioned, live round loaded. I watched from behind glass, breath fogging the pain, heart thudding like a piston out of sync. The shot hit dead on. Angle took it, deflected right. Minimal damage. Tank intact. No smoke, no fire, no body bags. Just steel, holding. And you know what happened next? Nothing. No clapping, no shouting, no "bring that man in here." Just more notes, more whispers, more boots walking away. That night I walked past the testing hangar and found one of the engineers standing by a crate, smoking. He nodded at me. Didn't say thank you. Didn't say sorry, just muttered, "Not bad work, Ellis. Should have gone to school." I didn't answer, because I'd seen the fire in that file cabinet, and I knew my name wasn't in it. You just saw the moment everything boiled over, but the fight's not done. Stick around for Chapter 4, where silence becomes a weapon, and a mechanic learns how to use it. You ever feel the whole system take a deep breath like it's about to swallow you? That's what it felt like after the test. The angle worked. The Sherman held. The math checked out. But instead of a handshake or even a damn nod, all I got was a new uniform and a tighter collar. No promotion, no credit. Just a transfer order with my name misspelled and a list of new responsibilities that smelled like a burial. They moved me to Quartermaster Station B6, tucked behind a half-dead supply route in the middle of the English countryside. The kind of place nobody asks about unless the food truck's late. They didn't say why. Didn't need to. The message was loud. You did your part. Now disappear. My job? Inventory oversight. That's what the folder said. What it meant, sort bolts by size, grease chains, and pretend like I hadn't just designed the only tank mod anyone actually bothered to test. They stuck me in a prefab shed with a busted window and a desk made from an old ammo crate. No chair that didn't wobble, no phone, no map. Just a stack of damaged parts tags, a hole in the roof, and one standing order. Keep to yourself. At first, I played along, head down, mouth shut. I did my hours, logged the intake, ate the beans, fixed the lights, swept the floor. They wanted me to fade, so I started fading, until the letters started coming. First one was from Wallace, the Philly kid. Turns out his transfer hadn't buried him. It gave him room to breathe. He'd landed in a motor yard up north, full of misfits and too smart for their own good types who knew how to keep quiet and get things done. Unofficially, they called themselves the Bench. No insignia, no title, no papers. Just men who knew how things worked, really worked, and passed notes instead of orders. His letter was simple. Saw Spec A was greenlit. We both know why. Keep drawing. I didn't respond at first, but then came the second letter, from a mechanic named Parker out in Belgium. He said someone had seen my sketch, not the army version, being passed around at a depot like some underground gospel. Said the boys called it the wrench fix. That hit me. Not because of pride, but because I finally understood what was happening. They weren't just trying to erase me. They were trying to absorb the work without the voice that came with it. Take the idea. Strip the name. Keep the silence. So I made a decision. I dug out the original revision M47, added every note, every correction, every detail I'd learned since. Then I made 10 carbon copies, old school style. Ink-stained fingers, smudged edges, elbow grease, and stubborn breath. And I mailed each one to a different man from the Bench. Not with instructions, with stories. The crew I'd lost in the first tank, the burn marks on the hulls, the angle that bought 10 more seconds, the sketch on the back of a sandwich order. Each packet came with one promise. You didn't imagine it. It's real. Keep building. The next week, I got visitors. 2 men, plain uniforms. Not MPs, worse, inspectors. They didn't knock, didn't greet, just walked in while I was mid-rivet, looked around like they owned the place and said, "Private Ellis, we need to ask you a few things about some outgoing mail." That's when I knew the fire was lit. They weren't loud, they were surgical. They pulled my files, checked every envelope, opened drawers, took pictures of papers that weren't classified, but suddenly looked like they might be. You been in contact with foreign posts? No. You circulating unauthorized schematics? No. You trying to impersonate an engineer? I laughed at that one. They didn't. Next morning, the lock on my shed was changed. No notice, just locked out. I stood there for hours, staring at the door, holding a wrench like it was going to argue back. I wasn't mad. I was done playing dead. So I went into the supply hangar. I found an open crate. Inside, an M4 Sherman radiator panel with a new angle spec. My angle. Stamped, approved. That was all I needed. I walked straight into the command tent. No appointment, no permission. Captain Reeves was there. Younger than me. Polished, eyes like he'd never spent a night on the floor of a freezing motor pool. He looked up, surprised. I dropped the stamped panel on his desk. "That's mine," I said. He looked confused. "The angle, the slope, that's mine. Private, that's classified material. No, sir. That's field work, drawn on a bad day, with worse ink, by a man you tried to bury in bolts. And I just wanted to stand in one room, where someone said it out loud." He didn't stand, didn't blink, just said, "You're dismissed." I left, and you'd think I'd be defeated. But I wasn't, because sometimes the win isn't the recognition. Sometimes it's knowing they had to use you, even when they didn't want to. That night I got another letter, just one line, from Wallace. It's spreading. The silence didn't stop him. It fueled something bigger. In Chapter 5, the tide finally turns, not from orders, but from the ground up. You won't want to miss it. You ever try to kill an idea? Not with a bullet. Not with a flame, but with silence. That's how they came at me. Not fists, not jail, just the slow choke of paper, policy, and pretend you don't exist. But I wasn't alone anymore, and they didn't count on that. It started quiet. Little things, new crates arriving with no signatures, fuel shipments doubling without anyone asking, extra weld plates showing up with handwritten specs. My specs slid in between. No announcements, no approvals, just presence. And then one afternoon a Sherman rolled in for emergency repair, fresh from the front, cracked open but still running. Not melted, not shattered, just bruised. The crew stepped out, dusty and wild-eyed, uniforms scorched at the edges. "Spec, eh?" I asked, barely above a whisper. One of the gunners looked at me and nodded. She took a hit, right on the chin, glanced off like it didn't even want to stay. They didn't know me, but I knew that tank. A week later, word came through unofficial lines. New armor kits were being deployed. Field retrofits, not factory-built. Instructions passed hand to hand, no signatures, no seals, and the name that came with it. Ellis Slope. I found out from a cook. He heard it from a driver, who heard it from a tech in the Ardennes, who got it from Wallace. That night I stood behind the supply tent and lit a match with fingers that hadn't stopped shaking since January. It wasn't pride, it was clarity. You can shut down a man, but you can't shut down every man who saw the same thing he did. Then came the one thing I never expected, a request for my presence. Not from an officer, not from the engineers, but from a field commander. Name redacted, location classified. Just a transport order and a note. Bring your sketch. You're not coming to explain it. You're coming to see what they've done with it. The trip was long, cold, standard jeep. One guard, few words. When we arrived, I knew we weren't at a base. No gate, no flagpole. Just a half-frozen clearing with canvas overhangs, crates stacked to the sky, and at least 3 Shermans mid-assembly. But these weren't standard builds. I could tell from a mile away. They were prototypes. One had my full slope across the hull. Another had my turret rotation fixes, the counterweight I'd drawn on a napkin 2 months prior. The third had modifications I hadn't even dared sketch, improvements on top of what I started. It took the wind right out of me. A tech walked up. Dirty boots, face smudged with soot, goggles pushed up. "You, Ellis?" "Yeah." No offense, man, but I thought you'd be taller." I laughed. Couldn't help it. He handed me a clipboard. Not with orders, but with credits. Handwritten. Each man who'd added to the design listed by name. Mine was at the top. Not stamped, not typed, but written. In ink. Harry Ellis, original slope design. That page was more than a name. It was proof. Not just that I'd done something worth remembering, but that people chose to remember it. Without waiting for permission. I spent 3 days there. No brass, no lectures, just mechanics, welders, testers. The kind of people who made things work instead of talk about them. They showed me how they'd reinforced my slope with new materials, how the angle reduced shrapnel spray inside the cabin, how one tank took 3 direct hits and still made it back with the crew intact. They weren't just building tanks. They were building chances. On the last night, a quiet kid named Fisher brought me a cup of burnt coffee and asked if the slope was really mine. I nodded. "You ever think they'd let you talk about it?" he asked. I shook my head. "They don't have to. The work speaks." He smiled. "Yeah, but still, we all know. And maybe that's what mattered more. Not medals, not speeches. Just that, somewhere out in the mud and smoke, a group of men had made space for one mechanic sketch and built it until it roared. When I got back to Station B6, everything had changed without a single word from command. My shed had new locks. Inside, tools returned, cleaned, organized, a small crate on the bench, fresh gloves, unrequested, and taped to the wall my original sketch, laminated, framed in wood. No ceremony, no salute, just presence, like someone had walked in, put it up, and walked out, because it belonged there. They didn't promote me. They didn't decorate me. But they stopped trying to erase me. And sometimes that's the loudest victory of all. That sketch didn't just change a tank. It changed the men who touched it. In the final chapter, we see what happens when an army follows the voice it once tried to silence. They say war is a machine. Cold, calculated, without a face. But that's not true. War has a face. Sometimes it looks like a captain in a clean uniform giving an order he doesn't understand. Sometimes it looks like a 19-year-old radio tech trembling in a trench with ink still wet on his enlistment papers. And sometimes, just sometimes, it looks like a mechanic with grease on his neck, watching a line of tanks roll out. Tanks he helped shape with nothing but a pen, a gut feeling, and stubborn knuckles. It happened on a Tuesday, April 11th, 1945. I remember the exact date, because that morning the wind smelled different. Less like damp canvas, more like metal and urgency. We got a call, a real one. Not orders to pack, not instructions to file, a call. There'd been movement near Kassel, reports of enemy armor, real armor, dug in and ready. And someone, somewhere, had made a decision. Send the new ones, send the tanks with the slope. They called it Operation Coil. 3 Sherman units, 36 total, with at least 14 fully retrofitted to Spec A. Some in pieces, some hybrids, some pure. I wasn't on the roster. No one expected me to be. But then I got tapped. Not by command, by the crew chief of the 7th column. "Ellis," he said, "you're coming with us." "Me?" I asked. He shrugged. "Who else knows what's under the hood better than the guy who rewrote the hood?" They gave me a seat on the last tank. Not in the turret. Not driving. Just riding shotgun on history. That morning we rolled out, engines humming low, tracks biting into frost-cracked roads, sun low and mean behind us. And let me tell you something. There's a sound you never forget. 30 Shermans, moving in sync, all of them built just a little different because one man drew something when nobody asked him to. The push wasn't smooth. We hit resistance before noon. First contact, open field, anti-tank nests behind a hedgerow. The first shell screamed in from 600 yards. Direct hit, front plate, and just like before, the angle caught it. Glanced, dented, no breach. Driver was shaken, but alive. Gunner re-angled, returned fire. Nest cleared, just like that. No casualties, no smoke columns, no burning metal tombs, just movement. We kept advancing, over the ridge, through mud, wire, and old fear. 2 more hits came in the next hour, both front-facing, both deflected. By midday, something happened I hadn't seen since the war started. Confidence. Crews started shifting posture. Not hunkered, but ready. Commanders stood taller in the turrets. Voices on the radio sounded less like whispers and more like choices. It wasn't about glory. It was survival, with momentum. At the halfway point, we stopped for reloading. A tech from another unit jogged up to my tank. "You Ellis?" he asked. I nodded, already halfway through checking the track tension. He held up a folded note, dirty, corner-smudged. "Guy up front told me to get this to you." I opened it. Just one sentence. "We're not patching anymore. We're holding." I folded the note, stuffed it in my jacket. Didn't say a word, but I could feel it in my chest. That slope, that stupid, stubborn, unpaid-for angle was working. By late afternoon, we reached the fallback line. The battle was still going, but not the way we'd seen before. We weren't limping, we were pressing, pushing, holding angles we used to abandon. The brass showed up after the dust started settling. Jeep rolled in, flags waving, clipboards already scribbling. They didn't speak to the crews, didn't touch the tanks, but I saw them looking, especially at the mods, especially at my weld lines. One officer leaned over and whispered something to another. That second man turned toward our tank. I stood up. He didn't walk over. He nodded, that's all. But that nod carried the weight of every ignored report, every shut door, every "just fix it and move on." When we got back to base, I expected the usual. Silence, reassignment, maybe a new shelf to count instead. The CO handed me a folder, not sealed, not heavy, just thick enough. Inside, field confirmation of Spec A success under fire, recommendation for further production, memo from a commander named Hayward, and, stapled at the back, a copy of my sketch. Initials, HE label, origin, field proposal, field proven. They didn't throw me a parade. No newspapers. No cigar in front of the flag. But they did one thing I hadn't seen in a year. They stopped fighting me, and for a man like me, who didn't want to be right, just wanted boys to come home in something other than a box, that was enough. So, yeah, they tried to erase the wrench, but instead they handed it back, not in ceremony, not in speech, but in metal. In motion, in lives kept breathing because one mechanic didn't keep his mouth shut when it would have been easier. This was never about tanks. It was about one man refusing to be disposable. And somehow, against silence, against system, the sketch lived.